Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. From where I stand, we seem to have a somewhat smaller crowd than yesterday, but I guess it'll swell as the day goes on. I hope you enjoyed your evening in Dublin. I can say that we can apologise for the little bit of rain you had to encounter on the way back. In Ireland, we would call that a soft day. The gentle rain that helps to keep the country green. And it's important because we too would not be green if we didn't have that rain. On the screen a short time ago, you may not have noticed it, but there is an invitation to download the app for the conference. And the app itself is, wherever you're downloading it from, World Potato 2022. It helps to bring everything together into the one place for you if that's what you want to do. And also for anybody on social media, on the back of your name tag, back bottom, there's the hashtag to put with anything that you're tweeting. It's hashtag WPC 2022 Ireland. Okay, now it's time to begin this plenary session, and the title of it is If I Can. 3 simple words that, for those of us in the English language, generally give rise to the possibility of other words to follow. Like, if I can, I will. Or, if I can, you can. And in our daily lives and what we do, we have come to, I think, readily complain about the things that we don't have to do the jobs that we want to do. And I think it's maybe a human failing. And in that regard, our next speaker is an inspiration to us all. And if we take the requests made from the podium here yesterday evening for all of us involved in this Congress, in the food production system, to go out and to find ways to produce more food and to do the best we can with what we have. So our next speaker, Chris Cook, is an inspiration to all of us to make the best use of what we have in order to do what we can, both for ourselves and humankind. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Chris Cook.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. I'm just going to grab my clicker here. And a bunch of the speakers today and last night are going to be bringing up a potato for a prop as part of their presentation. I don't need to bring up a potato. I think of all the people here today, I'm probably the one that's shaped the most like a potato. So I'm just going to pull up my cheat notes here so I remember to cover everything that I want to talk about this morning. And so thank you for having me, first and foremost. This has been a long time coming. I guess for several reasons. I did a presentation for John Deere UK in Langer, and it was shortly after that I believe it was Chris Wiltshire, but I can't remember for certain, had asked me if I'd be interested in speaking at the World Potato Congress in Dublin, which I've told people I will travel anywhere, I will talk to anybody. I jokingly say I'll talk to anybody who will listen, but so it was an instant yes, absolutely. I'd be more than happy to. And unfortunately, for reasons that we are all well aware of, this conference was delayed. But it's also pretty special to be here in Dublin. My mom's side of the family is Irish, so this is coming back to some of my roots. And so my grandpa, Tom Morkin, and he was also, my grandpa Tom Morkin was was the biggest reason why I have such a passion for agriculture and I got into agriculture. So if you are a Morkin or an O'Leary, there's a chance that we're related. Keogh's as well. So we'll talk. I unfortunately don't have enough time here in Dublin to track down some of my family over here, but no, definitely very special being here. And again, thank you so much for having me be a part of this. I guess the best place to start my presentation would be the very beginning and address the whole obvious elephant in the room, the whole thing that you can see with me here up on stage and up on there. The fact that I'm missing arms and legs, I was born like this. No real known reason as to why. My mom never did anything or took anything during the pregnancy that she wasn't supposed to. I've had a lot of people ask if it was thalidomide, which was a morning sickness pill back in the 60s. That's way before my time. Also, I grew up in southern Alberta, Western Canada, kind of a small farming and ranching community, which has been accused of being a little bit hillbilly and redneck. So my parents are not related. That is not why I was born like this. Just want to make sure I cover all the bases. It's just one of those things that happen. And even though I was born missing arms and legs, my life growing up was very normal. Went to regular school, played all the same sports my friends were playing, and helped out on my grandpa's farm. And I go as far as to say that my life growing up without arms and legs was actually pretty easy. And people find that surprising. Like, how could it possibly be easy growing up without arms and legs? And I think there's two main reasons why I can safely make that claim. And the first reason, and in my opinion, the most important reason, is a good sense of humor. If you can't laugh at life, what can you laugh at? We all have challenging days. We've all had frustrating days. We've all had to have one of those days where it seems like absolutely nothing's going your way. And I think when you're having one of those days, if you can find some reason to laugh, kind of shrug it off, it helps you get over it a little bit quicker, and it gives you some semblance of having some control over what's going on. And that mindset, that approach, that whole idea of if you can't laugh at life, what can you laugh at? That was started day one, the day I was born, when my grandma on my dad's side heard that I was born missing arms and legs. Her reaction, and this is a true story, her reaction was to say that my dad never finishes anything he starts. And that was perfect. That was absolutely perfect. I could not have asked for a better start to life. Her reaction wasn't, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? What a tragedy. Her reaction was, all right, it is what it is. Everything's going to be fine. We're going to figure this out, and we're going to have some good laughs along the way. And we've done just that. My brother refers to me as his half-brother. I like to take advantage of it. Being my size, I can hide in some tighter spots and scare people. I love a good scare prank. And this podium here it's all closed in the front, so you'll be thankful that it is. I was speaking at a conference in Toronto quite a few years back, and one of the guys that was speaking before me is a good buddy of mine, and he's one of those people that when he gets up on stage, he goes to the podium, and he does not leave the podium for his whole presentation. So during the intermission, I went and hid inside the podium. But I didn't want to scare him as soon as he got up there. I wanted him to get nice and comfortable and well into his presentation. So after about 10 or 15 minutes, I reached out and I grabbed him by the knee and I went, whew! Scared the crap out of him. What I didn't account for is he might say something that he's not supposed to say in front of a crowd, but which just made it even better. But I love taking advantage of it. And so the humor isn't just about laughing through the nightmare or kind of shrugging off those frustrating days, but it's also a great icebreaker. When people first meet me, they're not too sure how to respond, how to react. They don't want to say anything rude or inappropriate. So if I can crack a few jokes, it puts people at ease. They realize I'm just a regular dude, enjoying life, having fun. One of my go-tos, I spend a lot of time at airports, and more often than not, when I check in for a flight, they'll ask me if I need a seat closer to the front of the plane so it's easier for me to get on and off. And I say, honestly, I really don't care where I sit on the plane. As long as there's lots of leg room, I'm happy. And you say that with a serious face, kind of deadpan, and you see that panic in their eyes, which I love messing with people. But so the humor, huge part. The other reason why growing up without arms and legs was easy is this has been my normal my whole life. I've never known what it's like to have arms and legs. And I tell people, honestly, in my opinion, growing up with arms and legs and growing up without arms and legs is pretty much the same. All of you have arms and legs and fingers and toes and knees and elbows, a bunch of lucky bastards, but you have what you have and you just figured out how to do things. Pretty much the same thing for me. When you're little babies, you learn how to grasp things with your hands, and then you learn how to crawl, and then you learn how to walk. It all happens naturally. Basically the same thing for me. I just figured out how to do things the way I do them. It might take me a little bit longer to do certain things. Some things I have to do differently, and it definitely takes me more energy to do certain day-to-day tasks like climbing up a set of stairs or getting from A to B on my longboard. If there's a couple inches of snow on the ground, but anything you could do, I'm able to do as well in some shape, way, or form. I'm completely 100% independent. When I travel on my own. I don't need to have somebody coming with me to help me lug bags around or help me get ready in the morning. Completely 100% independent, self-sufficient, and a big reason why is the way my parents approached it all. They realized very, very early on that they did everything for me, made sure everything was nice and easy, removed as many of the challenges and obstacles as possible. That would have robbed me of the opportunity to learn things like resilience, clever outside-of-the-box ways of figuring things out. And, my mom and dad said it was tough. They wanted to jump in, they wanted to help out. It's tough to see me struggle, but, they realized that would be doing me a huge disservice. And I tell people, whether it's your own kids or employees, the best thing you can do is less. When you give people the opportunity to thrive, more often than not, they will impress you, and they will, more than thrive. So that's huge. Like I said, part of my life growing up, or a big part of my life growing up, some of my earliest memories as a kid were bouncing around on the tractors and combines with my grandpa, my dad, my uncles, and I still do farm as much as I possibly can to this day. It's pretty easy. I don't need to make any changes, any modifications, or any alterations to the equipment. Basically, any piece of John Deere equipment, I can climb up and operate it just as is, straight off the lot. It's all hand controls, hydrostatic transmission. They're my best friend. Case equipment and Ford and all that kind of stuff. Massey Ferguson. New Holland. I can operate those too. My left eye does start to twitch a little bit. On that, no, I'm partial to the green equipment. No, it's all fantastic. It's all awesome stuff. But yeah, I love farming for all the reasons everybody here loves agriculture. It's part of who I am. It's not just a job, it's a way of life. And but I also love it because it's not a job people expect people without, a guy without arms and legs to be doing. I love that wow factor. I love proving to myself, first and foremost, what I'm capable of doing, and then proving to others what I'm capable of doing, and hopefully has them look within themselves and say, hey, if this guy without arms and legs is running the tractors and the combines and the sprayers and all that kind of stuff, maybe I can raise the bar in my own life just a little bit more. And that's a very important distinction. Prove to myself first and foremost what I'm capable of doing. I've had people who have doubted my abilities. I've had, naysayers or whatever. I don't want to go out there and prove them wrong and make them, feel like an idiot or embarrass them because they doubted my abilities. I know what I can do. I know my limits, and I know my strengths, and I know my abilities, and I want to prove myself right. And the family that I'm close. Well, my grandpa moved strictly to cow-calf, so to get my agriculture as far as farming is concerned, I was helping out close family friends, and even traveling around doing presentations like this. I get to go visit other people's operations. So this video, I filmed helping out at a buddy's farm down in central Georgia. So that's a cotton field there. And when I posted this video up on Facebook, I had a bunch of people with comments, to the effect of, there's people with arms and legs that aren't willing to go out there and work. This guy's missing arms and legs, and he's out there doing it. But my favorite comments were, that's a real American hero right there. And I thought, well, first of all, I'm Canadian. Secondly, the Toronto Blue Jays shirt should be a bit of a clue that I'm not an American. But anyways, no, I absolutely love it. And but like I said, this is my main job, traveling around doing presentations, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I've been lucky enough to speak, all around the world. Places like Australia, Asia, Europe, obviously, North America, obviously. And I love it. But it originally started as an idea for a travel show. I absolutely love traveling. I've been to, Ireland now is my 32nd country. No, not quite yet. I landed here and got out of the airport around 11:30. So as of 11:30, I'll have been on the ground outside of the airport for 24 hours. It will officially qualify as my 32nd country. A good buddy of mine, JR, also an avid traveler. And quite a few years ago, I was going to Carleton University, living in Ottawa, Canada, and he was hitchhiking across Canada, and he crashed at my place for a couple days. And one night, we're having a couple of drinks, talking about places we'd love to go to, all the bucket list adventures we'd love to cross off that bucket list. And we got thinking, there's actually kind of a neat concept for a travel show. There's all kinds of travel shows out there. Ours would be unique and that there's a guy without arms and legs, you know, going around doing all these cool things, going on all these neat adventures. So we took a trial run just to kind of see if this was something that was plausible. So we decided to backpack through Brazil for about a month. I don't know if there's any Brazilian. I did run into one Brazilian yesterday. But yeah, we traveled around through a month for about a month, going from Manaus down to Rio de Janeiro. And yes, it was, I was able to travel in that way, and it was a neat concept for the travel show. So we partnered up with a production company out of LA and shot the very first episode of the pilot of this travel show concept, which if we have time, I'll show you a short little clip of that travel show at the very end. But it has turned into doing these presentations, and it's been amazing. I love it. I love sharing my story. Growing up in agriculture, I do end up speaking at a lot of ag-related conferences, and I don't know, ag people are just, nothing against other, sectors of professions, but ag people are just down to earth, awesome people, and so even though I don't get to spend as much time on the farm, I get to hang out with a lot of farmers, and I absolutely love it. Now, a couple of sub-messages under the umbrella or the main topic of If I Can, well, every day may not be great, but there's something great in every day. I guess I had mentioned earlier off the top that my life growing up was very easy, but it's not to say that there wasn't difficult days. It wasn't to say that there hasn't been funks. Those are inevitable. Not every day is sunshine and roses, and a lot of times when anybody's going through a rough patch, things just aren't going their way. It's really easy to blame it on something else. And a lot of times we pick an easy scapegoat, a variable that we can't change or a variable that we have no control over. And for me, on my worst days, on my most challenging days, it's really easy to think, if I had arms and legs, life would just be a heck of a lot easier. If I had arms and legs, I wouldn't have to work 400% harder than everybody else to get from A to B when, like I said earlier, there's a couple inches of snow on the ground. And in those moments, I'm wasting time and energy on something that I can't change. I don't have arms and legs. I'm never going to have arms and legs, so why worry about that? Instead of worrying about what I don't have, I try and concentrate on the positives. This job, I absolutely love this job. I've met some incredible people. I've heard some amazing stories, and a lot of times what happens after I finish a presentation is, I'll chat with people afterwards, which, by the way, I'm here for the whole conference. I'm a quality over quantity over quality over quantity type of person. One of the reasons I love this job so much is the people I have got to meet. And like I said, oftentimes after a presentation, I'll hear other people's stories, and all of a sudden it's kind of a reversal of roles. And instead of being the one up on stage, trying to motivate and inspire, I'm inspired and motivated by what other people are doing. I've traveled to some amazing places, gone on some pretty cool adventures throughout this job. One of the more memorable ones, I was down in Australia speaking for a conference down there, and after one of the presentations, one of the conference organizers came up to me and he said, "So you say you're up for anything, like any kind of adventure, your game?" I said, "Absolutely. I'm a little bit nervous about what you have in mind right now, but I can't back out now. I just told a bunch of people that I'm up for anything." And he said, "All right, well, would you go shark cage diving with great white sharks?" I thought about it for a second. I'm like, well, I'm already missing arms and legs, so there's really nothing left to lose, so let's go do this. So it was awesome. So the next day we get on the boat, and it's a 2-hour boat ride from Port Lincoln in South Australia to the Neptune Islands, where all these great white sharks converge. And I was telling all the other tourists on that same boat that was actually my second time shark cage diving. So, but yeah, those types of adventures. I have an amazing family. I have 2 little nieces, 2 little nephews. Absolutely love them to death. When I concentrate just on those few things right there, it makes the fact that I'm missing arms and legs absolutely moot, completely secondary. It does not matter. And I'll take it a step further, and I will tell you, I guarantee you, I'm having more fun and more success without arms and legs than I would have been had I been born with them. I might have been born with arms and legs, completely taken it for granted and just sort of coasted through life doing whatever, but I wasn't. I was born like this, and I'm doing my very, very best to make each day count, to be grateful for the things that I have, instead of worried about the things that I don't. And that's why I do these presentations, is to kind of glean a little bit of insight on my life and hopefully some perspective. We all have things. We all have things. We all have struggles. We all have challenges in our own life. Robin Williams, one of my favorite quotes of his, everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. So for me, my worst days to start thinking, everybody else has it so much easier and nobody understands the struggles that I'm going through. You're isolating yourself, you're putting yourself on an island, making it way worse than it really needs to be. And keeping that perspective is so very, very important. And that perspective, I remember this moment clear as day. Riding around with my grandpa, we were checking crops. It was mid-'80s in Western Canada or Southern Alberta. Huge drought. Prices of grain were absolutely horrible. I remember there was probably more bare patches from all the grasshoppers than there was actually wheat and barley growing in those fields. And my grandpa said, you know what, as difficult as it is right now, he said, I wouldn't change this for anything. Because he was doing what he loved. And he said there's going to be rough patches like this. There's going to be drought. There's going to be poor prices, poor commodity prices. And he said, and then there's going to be instances where you're going to have bumper crops and you're going to have great prices and you're going to absolutely thrive. He says it's a cyclical thing. It comes around. So you relish in the good days, but you remember that bad days could come around. And when the bad days are around, you got to maintain that knowledge that it does get better. And so that mindset also was instilled right from me from day one. You can feel sorry for yourself for what's going on, but you just got to live life. And that's taking control of your circumstances instead of passively waiting for them to decide your fate. I'm not one to just sit around and wait for life to happen. I'm not one for to wait for people to present opportunities. I want to go create those opportunities. And this morning, who did the 2K this morning? How you guys feeling after that? It was pretty good. It was a little fresh this morning though, but I went and did the 2K as well. And I wasn't going to tell this story originally, but I thought it fit kind of perfectly. Just creating your own opportunities. So I think about 6 years ago. My girlfriend at the time and I were going to do a half marathon each. It was going to be a marathon relay for the LA Marathon. And I figured I better let the marathon organizers know ahead of time that I'd be showing up on a longboard. And I didn't think it would be an issue. They have hand cycle divisions for people who use hand cycles, and there's a wheelchair division for those who are in wheelchair. I figured it wouldn't be an issue. So I contacted them in advance, and they said, yeah, no, we don't allow skateboards on the marathon course. And I said, well, it's not just some punk kid showing up on a skateboard. Like, this is my mobility aid. I said to them, if I had a wheelchair or a hand cycle, I'd use that. I said, heck, if I had legs, I'd just run the damn thing. But I don't. And so I finally got a chance to talk to the race director, and he said, I've told you already, we don't accept, skateboards. He says, if I let you use your skateboard, he said, all of a sudden, everybody that wants to take their selfie stick or a stuffed giraffe for emotional support, I'm going to have to let them all take everything. Okay, well, that's not kind of comparing apples to oranges here. And so I didn't want to just accept that, just kind of roll over and say, oh, well, guess I'm not doing any marathons anytime soon. So there was a story done on the whole thing in the Calgary Marathon, said that they look at things on a case-to-case basis and saw no reason, just with my abilities, that no reason why I wouldn't be able to do a marathon safely. And so I contacted the Calgary Marathon race director and said, hey, I was originally supposed to do a half marathon, but I said, if you're up for it, I'd love to do a full marathon. Go big or go home type of thing. And yeah, I did that marathon, and I've ended up doing 11, and it's been kind of a neat way to travel around and see some places. I've done marathons in Iceland, Malaysia, all over North America. And it's also just a great way to challenge yourself, push yourself, test yourself. And but also too, how can you tell somebody's done a marathon? That whole joke, don't worry, they'll tell you. Same as a vegan. How can you tell somebody is vegan? Don't worry, they'll tell you. But yeah, it's been a great way to keep challenging myself, keep pushing myself, and I think that's so important. I think every day we need to push ourselves, challenge ourselves, take ourselves out of our comfort zone. I think when you voluntarily push yourself out of your comfort zone, you're used to living in that area of discomfort. So when life forces you out of your comfort zone, you're not, floundering. So I encourage people day in, day out. There's that whole, that one song about the grads in '99, and in that song, everybody's free to wear sunscreen or whatever. He says, do one thing every day that scares you. And I think that's so very, very important. So for anybody who, thought they wanted to do the 2K, but they decided not to, you should have done the 2K. It's a great, and actually the days that you don't want to do the 2K, the days you don't want to get out and go for a run, those are the most important days to do it. Gets yourself going, gets the body flowing, or the blood flowing, oxygen to the brain. I was talking to Mark Lyons, the CEO of Alltech, when I was doing a presentation for them last week, and he said his dad, Pierce, ran every single day. And we both agreed that those days that you really don't want to go out there is the most important day to get up and get out there and do it. And I encourage you guys to do the same thing. I tell people I'm way more afraid of regret than failure. I don't want to look back on life saying, oh, I should have done this, or oh, I wish I would have done that. I want to look back on life saying, you know what, I went out there, did as many things as I possibly could. Maybe not everything went the way that I had hoped, but at least I put myself out there. At least I tried. And in those moments that I did fail, or that I did make a mistake, which, failing and making mistakes is not a big, bad, scary thing. Those are some of the, best life moment or life teaching moments that we have. But in those moments that I did fail or make a mistake, I came back stronger, wiser, and better because of it. And again, that's why I encourage you guys to get out there and make the most of life. Don't cheat yourself out of opportunities. I'm all about going out and collecting as many experiences as I possibly can. One of my favorite songs, I don't know if you guys listen to country music, but Zac Brown Band, Live Like Tomorrow Never Comes. If you're familiar with that song, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, check out the lyrics. And that's basically, I listen to that song before every single presentation. I want to go out there and live like tomorrow never comes, because you never know what might happen. You never know what circumstances might be thrown at you. So I think it's so important to did I accidentally click that, or did you? Maybe anyways, just get out there and make the most of life. I'm going to play this last little video. I'm going to be around for the next couple days, so if you have questions, you want to chat, please come visit. But yeah, thank you very much, and enjoy this little video as a closer. This jump has taken a huge leap of faith.
He's built this bridge to a new life, and he is jumping into totally uncharted territories. So this leap is everything.
If I can jump off this bridge and come out on top, I can jump into this new chapter of my life and come out on top. People create all kinds of limitations, and if people think I'm a hero, then I've done a pretty good job tricking them. I just like to have fun.
I think the world really needs a dude who's maybe had more struggle than everyone else, who still is so willing to go head on, just do ridiculous things and not take anything too seriously.
Chris is a living, breathing, not walking, but rolling example of that.
If I could take this leap of faith, anybody can. See you later.
Thank you, Chris. There's probably only 3 letters that sums up what you've just done and said, and they were the ones you used yourself. Wow. You are unquestionably a triumph of optimism over pessimism, a triumph of ability over disability, and a jewel in the crown of mankind. Be proud. Okay. Okay, when we're preparing the stage for our next presentation, I've just been asked to divert the conversation away from potatoes for a few minutes in favor of one of the other big commodities of the world, just for a little bit of background information. Most people here will be familiar with potatoes and the markets and the production and all the rest. Wheats and grains are the other big foodstuff in the world. And just for anybody who doesn't have any idea of just basic background numbers, the world was tightening in terms of overall supply of grains even before the recent attack on Ukraine. And just some very basic numbers. Ballpark in the world, year on year, we produce about 750, 760 million tons of wheat, and in recent times, about 1.2 billion tons of corn or maize. They're the biggest cereals in a 2.2, 2.3 billion ton grain harvest annually. In recent times, the overall surplus of supply and demand has been decreasing, partly because of production issues, partly because of consumption issues. And I think it's maybe appropriate just to give one statistic that you might remember, that for roughly the last 25 years, the world has been producing an additional 42 million tons of grains year after year after year after year. A lot of that has been happening on the back of rehabilitating land, bringing more land into the production arena. That overall continuous supply is beginning to end. We're not making more land, and that's a challenge. Just then to give just some very simple figures, and I know we have people from the Ukraine who will know an awful lot more about it than I do. I visited the Ukraine in 2007. In the previous year, they produced 38 million tons of grains in total. It was a drought year, lower than average. Last year or the year before, they produced 86 million tons of grains. Such has been the expansion of productivity and the rehabilitation, again, of acres that were redundant or abandoned. And they have become a significant producer, and we're hearing about that in our daily news. On average, over recent years, I'm just going to call them an 80 million ton producer. They export now roughly 60 million tons of grains. About half of it as wheat and half of it as maize. The maize in particular comes to Europe. The wheat goes wherever. Certainly an amount of it comes to Europe as well. And a lot of that has been traditionally exported through the Black Sea. And hence, that's giving rise to all kinds of market influences, market challenges and difficulties, and it's upsetting many of the normal market flows in the world. And I'm using that, or those few comments, in a sense, as an introduction to our next session, which is about understanding our markets. So we have all our markets thrown into turmoil. I've mentioned Ukraine, and before that we've had COVID and the difficulty with various difficulties in recent years with logistics. And now I'm delighted to welcome on stage Damien McLaughlin from the UCD Smurfit School, who will discuss the main issues that are affecting global food markets, and that's global food as distinct from Irish or European, and in the near future, because it's very hard to know what the future beyond a few years is for any trends nowadays. So can you welcome to the stage, please, Damien McLaughlin.
Thanks a lot, Andy. It's really nice to be here. I'd like to start by thanking Michael Hoey. I don't know whether Michael is in the room or not, but Michael made the original invitation. And those of you who know Michael, when he comes to speak at our school, I always say this is the most honest and honourable person you will ever meet in agribusiness. So, Michael, thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate it. As you know, I can't say no to you. So thanks again. Welcome everybody to Ireland. This is a country where you judge the extent to which a girl likes you or not by the amount or ways that her mother cooks potatoes for you when you go to visit for the first time. Now, my dad told me that, and the first time I went to my first serious girlfriend's house, and when I came home, my dad said, "How many types of potatoes did she cook?" And I said, "Dad, she made 5. She said, "Son, you're home." And 40 years later, we're still together. So the potato plays an important role in our society. I also should say I'm part of the Chris Cook bandwagon. I spoke after him at the Alltech conference last week, so I feel like we're on tour, Chris. I'm not quite sure where the groupies are, but I haven't seen any. But if you've got any, let me know. Just don't tell my wife of 40 years. I'm a professor at the Smart Business School in Dublin. I'm a professor in marketing. But about 20 years ago, largely because of Pierce Lyons from Alltech, I decided to focus only on agriculture and agribusiness. And exactly as Chris said, I did that because of the kind of people who are in this room. I'm not a farmer, I'm from Dublin, not too far from here. I love how people in our industry think about the world, think about each other, and how they treat the world and treat each other. Today I teach agribusiness at a whole bunch of schools around the world, and I write case studies on agribusiness companies, between 4 and 6 cases per year. I've written them across all sectors and all geographies. I also spend a lot of time working with CEOs on largely what we're going to talk about today, on strategy development in the context of what's happening in the world. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm not an agricultural economist. I'm going to talk to you about the things that I talk to CEOs about. And what Liam Glennon, again, Liam, thanks for the invitation. What Liam asked me to talk about was the global food market of the near future. You know, one of the things that we're still dealing with is the global financial crisis. It seems like a long time ago, but of course the unfolding of emergency financial measures is just happening now. So the global financial crisis of 15 years ago is still largely ongoing and affecting us today. Do any of you remember COVID? It actually seems like a long time. I'm sure if you've got COVID right now, I hear a few coughs in the room. You probably have COVID. Thanks for sharing that with us. But it seems like a long and distant memory when we were all locked into our homes. But it had fairly profound effects on our business. Many of my former students and a lot of my students, I've been doing this for 30 years, are older now. They just packed in work. They've made enough money. They've decided they want to go do something else. And so we've had this great resignation. The great resignation, as we think about it, is not the problem of just lower level employees. It's in fact middle-aged, highly talented employees who have enough money to say, you know what, I'm just not doing this anymore, and they're walking out of our organizations to go and do something that has more meaning in their lives. Of course, we had the horror of the Russian war in Ukraine and the inflation that comes with that, and frankly, the global food catastrophe, which is now about to unfold. It's a fairly interesting time to be leading a food organization. I think you'll agree. On top of all of that, we had this ongoing war between big food and small food, between good food and bad food. And the real question here for me is, who is deciding this? Who is actually arbitrating the issue of trust in the food industry? And it's fairly clear that for certain groups of people, that is a small number of people on social media. If you haven't heard of Laura Vitale, she has about 1 billion views on YouTube. If you're over 30, I'm going to take a chance you've never heard of her, unless your kids have told you about her. But basically, she's teaching young people how to cook and how to eat. And she's Italian-American, so the good news is she likes meat and she also likes potatoes. Of course, we all look with envy to these oat juice firms like Oatly, Impossible, that makes a burger of kinds. Blue Nest Beef, one of my favorite companies, a company that makes more sustainable beef, actually making a difference. And of course, Chobani. So our industry is being characterized by people coming from the outside, solving problems that we didn't know existed, but achieving very, very high growth on the basis of that. So I wanted to take a moment forgive me, I'm a teacher, I have to teach, and ask this question. So how should you think about the business environment? How do you manage these uncertainties, and how do you explain them to your people? The truth is, I'm going to mildly contradict our very fine chair today, who knows a lot more about agribusiness and indeed business than I do. But the truth is that we actually do know what the future of agribusiness looks like in 30 years' time. 30 years, if you're over 30, 30 years is not actually that far away. Things don't actually change that much. And I'm going to say to you that the 5 things to the future is, the consumer in 30 years' time is going to be a lot more proactive than they are today. The idea that we would have a non-sustainable production environment, or that we would not be producing sustainably in 30 years' time, it's an insane idea. Of course we will. We absolutely will have a digitized agricultural sector. Our industry is largely not digitized at all, and we will be digitized. The idea of operating in the kind of crazy food systems food supply chain that we do today, the aggression and negativity between partners, that cannot continue given the challenges that we have. And the new capital will continue to flow into our industry, and that will have significant implications. We know that. These things are, I think they're like lead pipe certainties. We don't know there's going to be another COVID. We don't know there's going to be another war. We know there probably will be on both counts. We know there's going to be climate catastrophes. But we do know that these things in agriculture will be absolutely true. Your problem as a leader of an organization is not what's going to happen, because we know this is what's going to happen. Your issue is the pathways along which your business gets there or doesn't get there. So you don't have to make it. There is no organization, there's no firm, there's no farm, there's no co-op on this God's earth that has any right to continue to exist. And we know that the average life of a firm on the S&P 500 today is about 11 years. So if your business has been around for longer than that, congratulations. But there's no reason why you should get another 11 years. So the question is, how do you navigate these environmental changes? So I've had a great privilege to teach at IMD in Switzerland, and my colleagues and friends there, like Tom Malnight and Arturo Brice, Howard Yu, well-known characters. What they suggest is that what we do is we think back and forward at the same time, and we do that continuously. So we know what today looks like, read the newspaper, come to the World Potato Congress, and we know what the future looks like. What we don't know is the pathways, how these two things will be connected. So what you need to do is to think back from the future and think forward from today. But you need to do it continuously, because it's the change that kills us in the end. So what I'm going to try and do today is go back to these 5 things, talk a little bit about how they pan out for how they look like today, what the issues are, and then think a little bit about what they look like in the future to try and help you to think about this, thinking back and thinking forward at the same time. So today's customer is a lot more proactive, no doubt about that. They are rapidly changing what it is that they demand. Values are much more to the fore in terms of purchasing today than they were. Health is much more to the fore as a result, particularly of COVID. We've seen this huge fragmentation of demand as small players with low overheads using contract manufacturing come into the market and say, yeah, we can do that little small thing there, and they chip away at large food manufacturers. A lot of the time we say the consumer's not willing to pay for sustainability. The consumer's not willing to pay for anything. So you can have demand for whatever you want. The consumer will say, yeah, we want this, we want innovation, we want sustainability, we want whatever. But there's generally an unwillingness to pay for it, largely because that is how we've set up our chain. We've set up the chain with the idea that food should be cheap and that the consumer does not have to pay a high price for it. What we are seeing is a rapid consumer response to inflation, the growth in value brands, a real switch towards private label consumers. But here's the kicker for every person in this room, and I think it is a kicker. This time it's different for the supermarkets. The last time we had this kind of a crunch, what supermarkets did was they decided they were maintaining margin. I'm talking about supermarkets in Europe here in particular, with apologies to colleagues from elsewhere in the world. But last time retailers decided they were holding their margin. This time, any retailer I have spoken to has said, we are not losing any more share to discounters. So we are heading down on price. And every person in this room knows what that means. It means they're coming after your margins and pushing your prices downwards also in order to protect retailer market share. COVID accelerated existing trends. It did not create any new trends. The consumer post-COVID is not reverting back to their pre-COVID behavior. Instead, we're seeing a confusing kind of mishmash, which is being accelerated or multiplied by economic uncertainty and by social change. Consumers are not going back to work, even if people are coming back to your organization 2 days a week, they're not coming back those 3 days a week. That's impacting on what they buy in the supermarket and what they eat. People have also rethought about how it is that they want to live their lives. So if we thought about what the future kind of looks like, one of the sort of scandalizing kind of ideas I came across a couple of years ago is there's about 7 billion people on the planet, but only about 1.5 billion of those are actually consumers. To be a consumer, you have to have more than $5,000 a day, because $5,000 a year, because below that level you have no discretion over what you spend your money on. So actually, we talk about feeding the 9 billion. Most of that is at subsistence level, and only about 1.5 billion actually have any choice about it. Of that 1.5 billion, about 90% can't afford to be proactive. I think it might actually even be lower than that. A friend of mine, Mike Bolgi at Purdue, says it could be as small as 1%. But I'm going to say it's 10% because it's a bit more credible with a group like this. But that 10% decides what happens in our markets. And I think what this group is trying to do is to take control of their lives. So if you think about when you were, I was married when I was 26 because of the potatoes, right? And I had my first home when I was 25, and I've had the same job since I was 24. Nobody lives a life like that anymore. Young people in their 30s, regardless of what country you're from, are still living at home with their parents. They cannot afford their own home. They have no career certainty. And what they are searching for is control over their lives. One of the reasons why they're so picky or so enthusiastic about food is it's a place where they can actually control what they eat and who they eat it with. So the control of your life through food is a major theme as we go forward. Millennials are the highest consumer in the history of mankind of fast food and also of breakfast cereal, the so-called, satanic foods, which of course is not true at all. But they won't feed their kids anything which is not super healthy or organic. I think also one of the big trends that we're seeing is that this new consumer, particularly post-COVID, is willing to engage with science in food in a way that they have not previously been, which I think offers tremendous opportunity for us, particularly in terms of CRISPR technology. Talk a little bit about sustainable consumption. I've chosen these words very carefully, and I've used the word sustainable consumption rather than sustainability. We've come through sustainability as largely being about cost. I've got to take on all these additional costs, and I think many people still think about sustainability through this lens. Most of us have been subjected or participated in retailer-led audits because retailers are really leading the way for this, largely to make themselves distinctive and also, as they see it, to respond to consumer demand. Many large companies, ADM, Cargill, Kerry Group in Ireland, are adjusting their portfolios to have in their portfolio of offerings more sustainable kinds of products. So that's how we know this trend is not going away, despite the hopes of some people in our market. Young people are terrified that the world is about to end because of environmental damage. When I was a kid, we were worried that we were going to be nuked by the Russians. I suspect it might be more appropriate to be more worried about that again, rather than the world ending because of climate change. But eco-anxiety amongst young people who I deal with on a daily basis is absolutely widespread. They're terrified about the impact that climate change is having on their world. Funnily enough, although trust in industry is lower than it's ever been, citizens of the world assume that industry will solve this problem for them. Meanwhile, the investor community is changing what it requires from firms. No longer is promises acceptable. I was at one of the big consulting firms in a sustainability special interest group about 3 weeks ago. And we called out firms there who were promising but not delivering, and then called out firms in our industry, in agribusiness, who were delivering above and beyond what they promised. I want to suggest to you that the reason why the consumer is not willing to pay for sustainability is because we don't actually ask them to. We explain the things in our chain. Yesterday I had a class and we talked about, well, the genetics of this particular type of pork is much better. The breeding techniques are much better. I don't know, my mother doesn't know anything about swine genetics. She doesn't know anything about swine breeding. If she knew how swine was bred, I think she'd never eat pork again. But that's what we talk to our consumer about. I don't think there's anybody in the food industry anywhere in the world who has actually given the consumer a compelling reason based on sustainability to buy their product. We're selling sustainable production, we're not selling sustainable consumption. We need to find something that the consumer actually resonates with. I think that's what a lot of people are searching for. I think what's also happening right now is a move towards branded supply chains over and above sustainability. So you can brand your supply chain. I think great firms like Patagonia in the clothing sector are absolutely doing that. Here's how this is panning out from my point of view. The great Ronald Reagan said, the word you should fear most is I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Well, government is here to help again. And what they're doing is widening the definition of sustainability. In this case, I probably wouldn't be so worried about it. What they are doing is reshaping what food sustainability means with an attempt to try and create resilience. I've half written a case study on a country in the Gulf region, and they have no land, they have no water, they got tons of money, and they got loads of sun. And they are terrified post-COVID when basically global shipping closed down, because they always thought they could just trade money for food. And what they realize is there's no shipping, you cannot trade money for food. So how do we control food sustainability for our organization? As Andy talked about in terms of the Ukraine, how do we feed our animals if we can't access the grains that Russia and the Ukraine previously provided to the world? So suddenly government is redefining what sustainability means. It's not just about carbon impact, but it's also about having more resilient food systems. There's no question in my mind that governments have accepted in a way that our industry has not the urgency of climate change. I think what, particularly in the European Union, is happening reflects the fact that politicians are willing to take and implement change today that previously they were not, because they were afraid of not being re-elected. But I think the changes that are happening right now are a lot more significant. So we've got these concerns of shock of supply and COVID-19, food sovereignty, and the desire to create local food systems where actually you can build a system where you can rely on local production to supply to you. So I've thought a lot about this with my students, and students are a great source of wisdom and insight because they tend to lack cynicism that those of us who are a bit older have. I want to suggest to you two things. One is, if you thought about the most carbon-intensive industries in the world, we're second after broadly the energy sector. And the energy sector is about to be transformed because nobody wants to use coal, nobody wants to use oil anymore. That industry is about to be transformed and will not be the same industry in 30 years' time. Our industry may be the only one of the major carbon-emitting industries that still survives in 30 years. And for us, there has to be extraordinary opportunities in that space. So I'm positive on this rather than negative. There has to be opportunities in that, and that's what young people are telling me. The second thing is, Microsoft has measured all of the carbon emissions that they have had since their foundation in 1975. And what they have committed to is to taking all of the carbon they ever emitted out of the earth. We are thinking about goals for 2050 as in some way some kind of great thing that we can achieve. What are the competitive advantages that are open to you if you make bigger and faster commitments to achievement? Can you actually have a competitive advantage if you make a commitment like Mike? It's difficult in our industry, I appreciate that. But a bigger commitment and a bigger achievement, I think, offers us real significant opportunity for advantage. Digitization of agriculture. In consumer-facing industries like fashion and retail and luxury goods, the consumer is demanding digitization. Smart supermarkets today are probably where this is manifesting itself most readily to us. You take something off the shelf, the Internet of Things allows you to connect it, it immediately reorders it. But you know all about that, right? Maybe what you haven't thought about is, what does the back end look like? What does the supply chain look like? Because it's the supply chain that really kicks us. Well, the purchasing people in most organizations today are technically millennials. They were digital-born people, and this is what they do. They sit around on the floor. I was in a major retailer in Germany about 3 months ago, and everybody shows up with their Apple computer because they couldn't possibly use a Dell or anything like that because they're evil. They sit around on the floor on these sort of orange boxes, and they talk about stuff while they're simultaneously looking at multiple devices. Well, if you think about who they are and how they behave, you think about their lived experiences, how is that impacting on how they are making purchasing decisions? And I want to suggest to you that those buyers in retail and in food service chains today, they have a selection of digital tools and a willingness to use those digital tools and an amount of information as a result of that which no buyer has ever had before. The idea of showing up and having a quiet conversation with a buyer, I think that's an old-fashioned idea. It will not exist in a very short period of time. So purchasing increasingly today across all sectors is happening with fewer inputs from the selling organization. These buyers, these millennial buyers, don't see why they should see you or your salespeople. And so what you've got to do is make sure that the content that you provide online and through your digital channels actually teaches the buyer. And remember this, that the buyer today doesn't buy features, they buy risk. So as marketing people, we sell features, but actually the buyer buys risk. Let me give you one example of how this is actually playing out. Walmart today negotiates contracts not face-to-face, but through an artificial intelligence system, run in this case by a company called Pactum. And basically all non-strategic purchasing is negotiated through a learning, so they learn how you negotiate, and they negotiate back with you. And I understand I don't have any figures on this, but they are saving very, very significant sums of money for this. So the question really here is, how many of you are in categories which are strategic to your customers? If you are not, your contracts will be negotiated in the near future on an artificial intelligence basis, because nobody wants to spend the time to renegotiate small terms. The question for you is, the opportunity exists that as technology releases those buyers to do other things, the opportunity exists for them to focus more on strategic purchases. And what is the opportunity for you to make what it is that you sell more strategic? I'm going to talk about one slide on this, and that's food systems. The evil of our current supply chain, the adversity of our current supply chain, the unwillingness to change, the unwillingness to share information, the unwillingness to pay farmers appropriately, simply can't continue for it to achieve all the things that we have just talked about. What we need to think about in the future is operating on a food system basis. That is one where information is shared appropriately, where we focus on being distinctive and differentiated in the chain, where everybody in the chain gets a fair crack in economic terms, and particularly the farmer gets their opportunity. I could call out 6 or 8 or 10 large retailers around the world and food service organizations who are actually operating this today. If you're not experiencing this, I have a little bit of bad news for you, and that is because you are not a strategic supplier. And what you've got to think about is, how can you become a strategic supplier to those organizations? Because again, many suppliers that I know are operating on this basis today. On a food system, it's not a food supply chain anymore. I want to talk just very briefly about new capital flows. Here's a question to provoke you as you go back to your country or go back to your hotel later on. How much external capital came into your firm or even your industry in the last 40 years? I'm going to take a guess and say none. The reason why so many family firms and co-op structures exist in our industry, because we have a very long-term view of capital, and we can recycle our capital in order to be effective. But coming to an industry near you today is a new group of diverse investors who are focusing on new opportunities which they see, which you have not exploited. That's kind of scary. They see things that you don't. Either you don't have the capital to exploit them, or you haven't had the courage to invest in them because maybe they're too small for you, or maybe they're not profitable enough for you. This is the investment in Global Ag Tech deal over the last 10 years or so. What you can see is it has exploded and continues to explode. But far more significant, I think, this is the investment by corporate venture capital organizations, big food firms investing in themselves. So what's happening in this, and why this is significant, is that this investment is reshaping our industry. We're investing in new techniques like vertical farming, has been largely poo-pooed. I think it is very, very significant, particularly for cities feeding themselves. We've got new products, like the explosion in alternative proteins. But we also have the idea of exploring the potential of new food. So a company I'm pretty familiar with is Bright Seeds in San Francisco. And basically what they do is that they explore the characteristics of products. They've just signed a deal with Ocean Spray to explore the specific characteristics of cranberries to allow Ocean Spray to make specific claims about its product. So what does the opportunity portfolio in your firm look like? And what opportunities have you got lined up to think about this? So 5 things for the future. They're the same thing for today as they are for 30 years' time. It's proactive consumers, sustainable consumption, digitized agriculture, food systems, and new capital. I'm not going to talk through this, but I like the idea of going back to your company and talking with your team about what you learned on a program. If you want to think about these ideas back in your firms, here's 5 questions that you can ask. These slides are available, so you can do this. You can access these yourselves. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your attention. Thanks again for the invitation today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Damien, for that fantastic insight into the world of watching what everybody else is doing. I can quickly say that it also qualifies you to address the very same problems that plant breeders have and potato breeders have all over the world. What's the future going to want? How can we combine what's needed to get there? Okay, we quickly move on from the overall food scene to address the potato market specifically, and I'm delighted to welcome on stage Cedric Porter of World Potato Markets to give his insights into the various issues that impact specifically on the potato trade. Cedric.
Go hara ma agut, Andy, and giha huja maya. Many thanks and apologies for mangling such a beautiful Irish language. Damien, the first time I went back to my first girlfriend's parents for a meal, they served me pasta. So I don't know what it didn't last very long. So, yeah, the dynamic global potato or prati market. And hopefully I've got all of your names for potatoes up there. If I haven't, please see me later and put me straight. So, World Potato Markets every week, every Tuesday, so I'm going to be busy today, plenty to write about. We publish a weekly newsletter on the global potato market in terms of production, and trends and exports and pricing. So let's just have a look. What's happened in the last 4 years? It seems, in some ways, doesn't seem very long that some of us are in Peru, but in other ways, I don't need to tell you a lot's happened between there and now. But great that we can actually be back unifying ourselves in this Congress. But through it all, people have still been eating potatoes, which I think we can celebrate that. And we did see people cooking more potatoes and perhaps sort of understanding how to cook potatoes more over the last 2 or 3 years, and particularly during those first lockdowns. And what is not to love about the potato? This is Miss Tata from Port Batat in Portugal. And she's flying the flag for Portugal's potatoes, but I've just borrowed her for the day to fly the flag for the world's potatoes. And there's just so many things we can do with our potatoes, and so many boxes that we're ticking there: fat-free, gluten-free, made into plastic, and that sort of variety of where it can be grown, high in potassium, high in protein. And the environmental benefits as well. And it can also be used to deliver vaccines in a sort of fresh form to eat it, rather than having to be injected with a vaccine, which might be more difficult in some parts of the world. So sorry, please, I apologize for some figures here. And this is just really sort of following on perhaps a bit from Dr. Ju's presentation yesterday in terms of really where are we at with the potato. And I would argue, are we actually underperforming? You see this area here. So this is in the last 60 years. The crop area of corn is up 90%. Rice up 42%, wheat up 7%, and potatoes actually down 25%. So we've unfortunately bucked the trend in the wrong direction in terms of the amount of potatoes being grown. Yields, yeah, well, all sectors have been doing much better with the yields, and they've had to because of the population. If you go back about 60 years, it was about 4.5 billion people in the world, or fewer than that. So wheat yields up 220%, corn up 190%, rice up 150%, and potatoes up 80%, which is good, but not to that same extent. And so sort of following through there. And what has that done from production terms? So corn production, we've seen this enormous increase up 465% in that 60 years. And then rice up to 250%, wheat up 240%, and potatoes only up a third. So that's really because of that reduction in the area. But as Dr. Jew was saying yesterday, that we can, if we produced, if we grew the largest amount that we've ever grown again, and we increased our yields, we could be doubling our production of potatoes in the next 10 or so years. And just some other sort of figures to flesh that out. Where in the world have we been growing more potatoes or a larger area? So there's a two-story part, if you like, with Europe, and most of Europe has been growing a lot less potatoes, particularly in the east of Europe. But there's 4 countries. And I've tacked on the UK there, and I think probably the UK shouldn't be tacked on there. It's obviously not a member of the EU now, but actually its potato area has decreased quite significantly. But those other 4 countries, Germany, France, Netherlands and Belgium, they've increased their area quite significantly, most significant increase of any of the actually regions themselves. That big increase in Africa, Central America, and world-wise, as I say, down, but and also down in other parts of the world, and as I say, especially in Europe there, and slightly down in North America. And the greatest yield gains have been in Asia and also in the EU. I suppose what's happened in the EU, in Europe, you've had that sort of professionalization, if you like. Potatoes have moved out from the backyard gardens, just sort of feeding the family and the local communities, more into the fields, which is, you know, that's good from a farming point of view, but has that been more sort of disconnect with people actually understanding and loving the potato? Is that disconnect there a bit more? And actually, in terms of yields, despite that increase, this is since these figures are actually since the International Year of the Potato in 2008, so not going right back 60 years. So actually, we haven't seen that increase, despite the increase in production and area in the EU4 and UK, we haven't seen that increase in yield. So is there a sort of a peak yield thing happening there in Europe, where they're getting around about 40 tons a hectare globally, double the global average, but still, you know, that fears of a yield plateau there. And this is in actual production. So again, you see that decline in Europe and a big increase in South America, Asia and Africa. You're seeing those sort of big increases, and obviously that's where the population has been growing that much faster as well. So you've had to have that increase in production to help keep up with those increasing populations. So I just wanted to touch on Ukraine, and very interesting to speak to Nick Gordichuk from the Ukraine Association and from Agrico in Ukraine. Around about 20 million tons of potatoes produced every year. Very similar to Russia in that respect. They sort of vie for 3rd and 4th position behind China and India. But it's still, within Ukraine, the vast majority of that, probably only about 2 to 3 million tons, is actually produced on a sort of farm level. Most of that is produced still on a sort of backyard and local level. And speaking to Nick, that obviously that this year, with more disruption to the farm level production, you've actually seen an increase then again of people wanting to plant their own potatoes for their own security, and really sort of showing in those terrible times that people turn to the potato because of its ease to grow and its high volumes from a small area. So it'll be very interesting to see. I mean, potatoes, I suppose, is not so key in terms of global terms with Ukraine as wheat would be, but obviously for the population there, being one of the largest consumers of potatoes per head is very important. Just looking at some of the trade figures now, we look at trade figures all the time, and we calculate every year what they are, and you see this enormous growth in the value of in the last decade or so, the value of potato trade, And of course, you saw a dip here during the pandemic year of 2020. You saw it come off. But even at that stage, it was still the second largest figure in global potato trade terms. 2019 had broken all records. And 2021 was almost back to 2019 levels. And I think because of the volume that have been traded so far this year, and the rising price of products as well, that will probably be breaking that record by value this year, depending, of course, what happens in the next sort of 6 months of the year. But we're on track to do that. And that demand has sort of bounced back very, very quickly as people come back into the restaurants and wanted their products, and actually it is being driven by the processing market. So just looking at some, apologies again for some of the sort of detail here, and you will have the slides to look at in more detail. But trade is dominated by these sort of 6 countries: Belgium, Netherlands, Canada, USA, and France do dominate trade, particularly in process, but also in ware table potatoes as well. So that is, and I suppose, do we have to sort of question ourselves, have they done very well in building that up? But do we have to question ourselves that actually are we very, very reliant on a handful of countries? And from a food security point of view, is that wise? And learning some of the lessons, perhaps from those countries, and some of the technology and whatever that's being used, will be important for food security for all of us. Just looking at the import market, and actually you can see here on the left-hand side here is table or ware potatoes, and that's much more. The trade there is much more local, so it actually. 3/4 of the trade is within Europe, or more than 3/4 of the trade is within Europe. Whereas for frozen fries, here you see it's a much more diversified market. You still have Europe being a big buyer of frozen products, and North America too. But then you have large areas of other parts, and it's actually those other parts of the world where the consumption is growing. Very significantly. There are sort of new, I wouldn't say new players, but there are players who are increasing their share. We've seen quite a big increase in Turkey, but actually over the last 2 or 3 years, or 5 years, you've seen China and India having a very large increase in their frozen fry exports. But you still have to put this in context. So annual exports for around about 50,000 tons, or just over 50,000 tons plus, and that's less than a quarter of monthly Belgian shipments of fries. So just does sort of put it in context of who the global players are. Just a few other figures here, and just this is really the top tubers and top of the pops and top of the tubers, and they're really looking at potatoes from a nutritional point of view. And I think nutritional can often be, what is it per gram, what is it per kilogram, what is it even per ton of product. But we've crunched the figures and looking at nutritional value per hectare, which is going to be very, very important, because that's how much nutrition you can produce per area of land. And of course, potatoes and their sweet potatoes cousin and their other cousin, cassava, score very highly in terms of that, even in protein. So if you're looking at protein, not much protein you'd think in a potato itself, but even a lot more than lentils there. Calories per hectare scores well, potassium and minerals, and all the minerals scores very well. And I think that's an important measure that we should be doing, is looking at per hectare rather than just per ton, because that's how we're going to produce. Just a little bit on costs. We've all seen the cost of production soaring, and is that a sort of holding back potatoes, that you've got around about sort of 5 times as much costing to grow a hectare of potatoes as it might do for wheat in some parts of the world. So is that holding things back? And that's an area that really sort of will be dominating the next day or two. And if we can come up with some of the solutions for that, then we'll be doing the whole world a favour. So I think years like this do show us the importance of preserving our resources that we have, and we rely on our water and our soil, and just caring for our soil in these sort of times is going to be even more important. And I think that's big. The environmental story for potatoes is quite extraordinary. So here you want to be at the bottom of the, like me this morning at the on the run, you want to be at the bottom of the list here. And there you've got sort of potatoes there with fruit and vegetables in terms of water use per litres per kilogram, grams of CO2, and meters of square meters of land per kilogram to produce. And these aren't my figures. These actually are the figures from Barilla, Centre for Food and Nutrition. And Barilla produce pasta. So you've got pasta in the sort of mid-table, and there you've got sort of potatoes ahead of pasta. So this isn't the potato industry saying it. This is actually the pasta industry saying that, that there's a high score for potatoes there. This is something I'm involved in. I'm vice chairman of, LEAF, Linking Environment and Farming. And that's been working for more than 30 years to help farmers improve their sustainability, to their environmental performance and their auditing of that. And I think there's going to be an even greater role in that. And I just have to have a quick pause for the sad news that we lost our inspirational Chief Executive Caroline Drummond last week, far, far too early. And I know her legacy, and I know a lot of the British here will understand her legacy, and it's building on that legacy at such an important time, which will be important for all of us. We know, just to finally sort of finishing up, we know what the challenge is, and we can see what the population growth is. So these are the UN figures for now. So this is the growth from 2022. So these are the growth for up until 2030, and then 2050, and the red line here to 2100. And you can see enormous growth in Africa, and actually a 200% growth in the African population predicted. Whereas you see Europe, and actually even in the next 10 years, the population of Europe is declining. And also, if we're eating in Europe, less potatoes per head, then that's quite significant as well, and a big decline in the European population over the next 80 years or so. So we know what part of the solution is, so we know what our challenge is, we know what part of the solution is, and I'd just like to sort of finish on how many other crops can you know that does all this? So has anyone had potato milk yet? Who's had potato milk? You've got to try Swedish potato milk. Potato plastic. This is newspapers wrapped in plastic. When I was a kid, we used to have fish and chips, and our chips used to come wrapped in newspaper. So now things have changed. Our newspapers now come wrapped in potatoes. So potato protein, as I say, on a per hectare basis, producing more protein than pulses. And that really high quality protein that's competing with dairy proteins, really sort of specialist proteins. Anyone been to the potato hotel, Kartoffel Hotel in Germany? That's on my list now after the pandemic, is to go and get rubbed down with a potato and have a bath full of potatoes. You can do all the kids' things. There's a real trend on YouTube, on TikTok for painting potatoes. Perhaps we should have a potato painting competition while we're here. And makeup. All my makeup is made with potatoes. So I don't think that's probably not a good. And what other crop has gotten such loved toys? Is there a Mr. Carrot Head or a Mrs. Wheat? Mr. and Mrs. Onion? Only us have got Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head. So we can celebrate the potato and in all its forms. And I think this is just an indication that there is no such thing as waste with potatoes. all potatoes can be used for something. They can be used for fries, they can be used on the table. If they can't, there's a whole range of things that are in demand, and some of those really are real sort of high value things as well. So it's fantastic to be able to celebrate the potato with you and really to help develop that potential and restart that sort of dynamic market at a time of such need and fears over food security. So this is the slogan here from Walker's Crisps, or chips, as most people in the world call them. And some see potatoes, we see potential. I think that's probably a good sort of slogan for all of us. So many thanks for your time and your attention. I'm proud to be here for the next 2 or 3 days. So come and say hi. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Cedric, for that insight into something that really impacts on all the businesses of everybody here today. Okay, just before we go on break, I just want to give some simple instructions as to what's happening here afterwards, so bear with me for just about a minute. When we return from coffee, etc., we break into 2 sessions. One for business, which takes place here in the concert hall, so if that's the one you want to attend, you're back here. The other one for health and nutrition takes place in room 2, which is immediately behind me. That's where room 2 is. When those sessions are over, then there's a poster session, which is on the veranda around the exhibition hall. In the afternoon session then, we're back at 40 and 45, breaking into 4 groups. Consumption takes place here in the concert hall. So if that's the one you want to attend, you're here. Plant health, room 2 behind me. Potato trade and use in Asia is room 3, which is the first room surrounded by black curtains as we go back to the exhibition hall. And then promotion and education is in room 4, which is the one, again, surrounded by black curtains adjacent to the exhibition hall. So that's where everybody will be going for the next number of sessions, and we're back here for 4:30 or 1630 hours for plenary session 3. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thanks to all my speakers for this morning, and thanks for your attention.